Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome to another episode of Environmental Justice Now. My name is Kadesh Gabre, and I am the Communications and Organizing Coordinator at Virginia Interfaith Power and Light. Before we get started today, I'd like to do a brief land acknowledgement. While we are on a video call, and many of us are joining from different places, we want to remind ourselves that we are gathered on the unceded land of the indigenous peoples. I am joining from so called Richmond, Virginia, right here in Shackle Bottom, and I am currently located on the land of the Powhatan and Chickahominy peoples. If you are unsure of whose land you are on and want to find out, you can visit nativeland.ca to find out, and that should be on the screen. Today, we are taking a short break from our usual General Assembly updates to bring you a very special episode with very special guests, Dr. Mazin Qumsiyeh and Nancy Wen. Past Palestinian author, professor, and environmentalist Dr. Mazin Qumsiyeh is co-founder and co-director of the Palestine Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability at Bethlehem University. Dr. Qumsiyeh, born in Beit Sahur, now teaches at Bethlehem and at Bizriyet universities. He previously served on the faculties of the University of Tennessee, Duke, and Yale. Dr. Qumsiyeh has published over 140 specific papers and many books on topics ranging from the cultural heritage to biodiversity to cancer. He and his wife returned to Palestine in 2008, where they founded and run the Palestine Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability at Bethlehem University. BIPS has become a mecca for visitors to Palestine and from around the world. Dr. Qumsiyeh and his wife and the volunteers and staff at PIBS continue to work to make a real difference for the sustainability of natural and human communities. We are also joined with Nancy Wayne. Nancy is a member of the Richmond Jewish community and co-founder of Richmonders for Peace in Israel, Palestine. She's also a board member of statewide coalition, Virginia Coalition for Human Rights, VCR, a board coalition representing 19 organizations across the Commonwealth. VCHR advocates for a free and open debate in our efforts to bring peace and justice to the people of that region. Most often on our broadcast, we discuss climate and EJ issues as they occur in Virginia and nearby states. Today, we are grateful to have an opportunity to discuss environmental justice and climate injustice issues from a broader global perspective. Our guest has a unique perspective and experience on environmental justice that we thought is important to hear. As we are all aware, Palestinian peoples have been in a struggle to maintain a homeland where they can pursue the same freedom of access to grow healthy food, drink clean water, and breathe unpolluted air. Today, we will learn about these issues. Help me welcome Dr. Mazin Qumsiyeh and Nancy Wayne to our show. How are you guys doing today?
Great.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for making the time. And we are so excited to learn more and to engage in a broader discussion of environmental justice because we understand that climate justice and climate injustices are global issues. And it's really humbling to have people like you on our show who are directly impacted and who are advocates for these issues worldwide. And, if I'm missing anything, if I've forgotten anything in my introduction, please feel free to add on and really boost up yourself because you all deserve to have your own horn tooted. So did I miss anything? Is there anything you would like to add?
Well, I can say I was raised here in Palestine, of course, which was always diversity of people here. It's a human diversity, but there's also very rich biodiversity. We're part of the Fertile Crescent where humans first developed agriculture. It's one of the richest areas in biodiversity compared to other parts of the world at the same latitude. So the biodiversity and human diversity are things that I'm passionate about and would like to talk more about.
Thank you, Dr. Qumsiyeh. And why don't we just get right into it? I'm really excited to, learn more about you as well. So why don't we start about, from you telling us a little bit about you, your work, and why led you to start the Institute and the museum? Because that is a big effort.
Uh, I was born in Beit Sahur, which is the shepherd's field. Our ancestors, those shepherds who heard the angels sing, were telling them to go up the hill behind me to Bethlehem, where Jesus was born. My family is Palestinian Christian, although it has structure. My father's Greek Orthodox, my mother is Lutheran, my wife is Chinese American, my son is born in Texas in the U.S. So we have a mixed heritage. Some of my relatives also converted to Islam. The people here where I'm born have always been a mixed communities, a diverse community of people, both in religions, in cultures, in backgrounds, and even in languages. And this multi ethnic, multicultural, multi religious society, of course, is threatened by the political structures that were created World War, which is the creation of a state called the Jewish state of Israel. But nevertheless, the people continued to have this coexistence in peace and harmony here in many areas. And what we want to do is preserve this diversity. And so that's why we are challenged by Zionism and political instability. But more importantly, we also need to challenge the hegemonic environmental injustice, which is represented by the five major threats in the world: climate change, overexploitation, habitat destruction, invasive species, and pollution that are recognized by the UN and the Convention Biological Diversity as damaging. We can add to them, of course, colonialism. So it's really six major threats to biodiversity, and that's what we work on.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Dr. Kumsiye. And Nancy, what brought you to us here, and how did you get involved in your awesome, organization of Richmonders for Peace in Israel and Palestine? You're muted, Nancy. No, you're all good.
Sorry. I want to be brief. I will just say that I was fairly, I would say, ignorant for most of my life. I was brought up, uh, I'm still Jewish. I was brought up and I did not hear the true story of what was going on in Israel, Palestine. I was totally unaware. It's rather shameful, actually, but about 7 or 8 years ago, I began by just reading a book and going to just trying to educate myself. And the more I learned, the more I realized that you once you know what's going on, you really can't um, ignore it. So for the past I guess since about 2014 or so, I've been very involved in trying to both educate both myself and the community to the reality. Unfortunately, the mainstream media does not present a lot of the information that is so important for people to know about. So I just want to hear what Dr. Qumsiyeh has to say, and I think we'll all appreciate his perspective. So.
Yes.
Thanks.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Nancy. And your perspective is also really important, and it brings in a different depth to our conversation. So thanks for sharing. And Dr. Qumsiyeh, I think this question is going to be directed to you. I know that you have done a lot of research on industrial waste. Speaking of that, 140 publications is a lot. So there's a lot of research. Can you tell us more about the practice of dumping toxic waste in surrounding Palestinian villages, and how has this affected these communities, particularly with regards to the health of the residents?
Well, let's make it even a little bit broader. I mean, anti-colonial struggles, the environment is also a victim. In the US, for example, when the Europeans came, they killed 2 million buffaloes and damaged the native way of living and connectivity to the land, etc. In the same way, this has happened here with the earliest, European Zionist colonization of Palestine. For example, the diversion of the water of the Jordan Valley from Lake Tiberias to the west, dried up the Jordan River basin, cost a lot of lives and a lot of people displaced from their lands. When Israel was created, there was a large scale removal of native people. Over 500 villages were destroyed. Many of the, all the trees around them were bulldozed, whether it's figs, almonds, olives, oaks, hawthorn, etc. And then the new state of Israel planted and this monoculture that replaced a thriving previous agriculture that was part of the Fertile Crescent, as I mentioned, is very important that they changed this multicultural system to a culture mostly of pine trees, which are also susceptible to fire. That's why in the Galilee there's a lot of fires that happen, etc., in those areas. There was also a drainage of Kula area, which deprived the native Palestinians there of their livelihoods. There was also the building of industrial settlements right next to Palestinian areas. And when I was living in the US, I noticed similar phenomena. By the way, for example, I lived in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and some harmful industries were built right next to the poorest communities, the natives, others, in the area, black people in North America. Always their backyard is violated, if you want, whereas the backyard of the rich people are not affected. So there is this impact of colonialism. Industrial settlements, for example, in Palestine, have caused DNA damage, chromosome breaks. My students studied this, and we showed that indeed it impacts human health, the pollution, etc. There is also cross-border transfer of garbage and other things, even nuclear waste. Israel, of course, is a nuclear country now, and it generates nuclear waste, which some of it ends up in areas like near Hebron, and it causes a lot of DNA damage and other things that we study sometimes, and we can show the effect of these cumulative. I mean, I could go on and on, but my point is that environmental injustice is intrinsic to colonization, anti-colonization struggles, and it's always there, and it's always something that we have to pay attention to. Unfortunately, it is not dealt with as seriously as other issues, other symptoms of these struggles, like the violence, terrorism, all these other things that are always on the media.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for really sharing that and bringing us back to the idea of environmental colonization, right? When we really think about what is history and how does the impacts of environmental colonialism has done to not just places like Palestine, but you can also see it. And thank you for bringing up the example of the U.S. For viewers in Virginia and Richmond, right? We've seen those impacts even today. Our indigenous communities in Charles City County, in Union Hill County, have been fighting a lot of environmental injustices here in Virginia, right? And environmental colonialism has unexpected impacts on indigenous peoples and the native lands in both short and long term. So you're really I'm glad that you covered the beginning of the settlement and what's been happening throughout history, because the effects of the first English settlements on the U.S. Lands are still being felt today, and I'm pretty sure it's still the same for
Right.
Palestine. And really, this kind of idea of environmental colonialism really brings the idea of global climate change back to us, right? Like colonialism happened throughout the world, and climate impacts are happening again throughout the world, and there is a connection. And there's also lessons to be learned from indigenous communities in Palestine, in Virginia, and Standing Rock, who are really fighting against this
Mhm.
form of colonialism
Yes,
even today, neocolonialism even today,
absolutely.
right? So to kind of talk about the idea of a global problem like climate change. Of course, climate change is a global problem. For example, we have recently seen flooding in Gaza, similar to what we've seen in other parts of the world, including the U.S. and even here in Virginia, even Richmond, which is even unheard of, right? Can you give us an idea of some of the specific effects of climate change within Palestine? I know you kind of covered the toxic waste of it, the dumping, the intentional environmental
Right.
degradation, but what about the side effects of a big problem like climate change?
Yeah, I mean, one of the issues that also we have to pay attention to, climate change, of course, is a global problem and it affects everybody, but it doesn't affect everybody equally. This is an important point. While most greenhouse emissions, for example, happen from Western countries in the Middle East and the Arab world are more affected in terms of the change in temperature. We've already had 1.5 degrees already here increase and decrease in rainfall, and we're expecting about 15 to 20% additional drop in rainfall in our region in the next 25 years or so. And we're expecting another 2 degrees, perhaps up to 4 degrees centigrade rise. And already there's an injustice in resource use here. Dominant society, which is the Israeli society, built as a state for the Jews, basically, and discriminates against non-Jews here. So non-Jews in this country, which changed name from Palestine to Israel, but non-Jews in the state of Israel, that's under the control of the state of Israel, are discriminated against in availability of resources. For example, water for every Palestinian, Palestinians use about 1/8 of what Israelis use in water in terms of per capita use of water. That's not because we don't need water, it's because we're basically the water is stolen from Palestinians and taken for the settlers who have swimming pools, whereas we barely have enough water for drinking and daily living. So this racist discrimination in availability of resources, of course, affects the ability to respond, mitigate, and adapt to climate change. Uh, there's fluctuations now in weather that are very severe. For example, last week here, last few days actually, we had a lot of rain, too much rain in one to come in 2 days. So there was flooding. The flooding, of course, impacted the Palestinian areas like Gaza and East Jerusalem much more than they impacted, let's say, the Israeli Jews who live in the same country, basically. Why? Because the Israeli Jews have an infrastructure that allows them to deal with this, whereas the native Palestinians were deprived of this infrastructure. Their infrastructure is even bombed occasionally and destroyed. So there's a lot of inequality in the resources available to people, but also in the ability to adapt to climate change, mitigate, and change situation that we are in because of the discriminatory laws and discriminatory allocations of resources, money, etc., which is again the same as what happens in the U.S. With the black communities, Native American communities, etc.
Absolutely. You hit it right on the head, and the similar issues of access to water, access to or even access to funds to protect communities from flooding, access to clean air is an issue here in Virginia, and since it is General Assembly session, these are the same issues that we're bringing up to the legislative. This year to really uphold and protect that all Virginians have access to clean air, to clean water, and have funds to protect themselves from impacts, devastating impacts like floods and then extreme heat in Virginia. So this is definitely. Environmental injustice seems to be a threat for a lot of Black and Brown communities across the globe, and thank you for bringing that to our show. And for the next question, maybe Nancy, you can start us off. What are we talked a lot about the negative impacts of climate change and the injustice that comes along with it. So, what are some of the ways that your faith helps to motivate and help you cope with these justice issues and to care for the earth in our home?
Well,
Uh,
well, for me, faith is very important. As a member of the Jewish community, I really take personal responsibility. I I am among the Jewish. I am a member of the Jewish community, but I do not support the state of Israel. I do not support Zionism. I feel that it has been detrimental both to the ethical tradition of Judaism, which talks about treating your neighbor as yourself, and everyone is made in the image of God. And I think that it is because of my religion that I am so really dedicated to trying to do what I can to change what's been happening in Palestine. And this all started, over 70 years ago. And one thing I just want to say is I wish that you could see, and I think I heard some of that from Dr. Qumsiyeh, if you could see what Palestine looked like prior to the founding of the state of Israel. I've seen pictures and I've heard stories how beautiful the land was and how lush the farms were, and it was, the environment there was beautiful. And over a period of time, that has certainly changed. And so I'm going to continue to support Palestinians and work for Palestinian justice. It's just part of what is most important to me. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. And that's I really admire that point about caring for your neighbor, right? Major all of the world's religions and the major religions tell us that borders don't exist, right? Neighbors are across state lines and country lines and continent lines because faith is borderless, right? You have Christians in the U.S. and all the way in Africa to Europe. The same with the Jewish religion. The same with Islam and having a lot of Muslim folks all over the world. So if we treat and act as if our neighbors are borderless, then we can stand up for injustices everywhere, right? So thank you for that amazing point. And Dr. Qumsiyeh, how about you? How does your faith really motivate you to really stay positive in the midst, being in the midst of all this injustice?
Well, all I can say is, each of us has a background. My background, as I mentioned, is Palestinian Christian, but I have learned very early on that respecting other people and other religions very, very important, and that strength comes from diversity. And I wouldn't want to live in a country that's all Christian, for example, or all Muslim, or all Jewish. Anyway, that would be boring, wouldn't? I think it's nice to have diversity, and diversity is strength, whether it's in nature or whether it's in society. And when I go to the Church of Nativity and I see a Muslim woman come and light a candle in the church, I start to cry because I see where the connectivity of religions, where the connectivity of people. And I have a nice gift I received from 20 rabbis from the Naturi Karta, recognizing my work with them and stuff like that. And my grandfather, once I saw when I was 10 years old in 1967, when Israeli forces came into the West Bank, and we were able to go back and forth between the West Bank and the rest of Palestine. A Jewish friend of my grandfather came to see him, and they were crying on each other's shoulders because they haven't seen each other in 19 years. To me, these are touching moments which shows, again, unity and diversity are connected. And I feel sorry for racists, who want to live just like with white people or just with Jewish people or just with whatever. To me, it's really not natural, and it's not natural for the environment also to have monolithic cultures or monolithic societies. So our work here at the institute, by the way, our motto is respect for ourselves, respect for other people, and respect for Mother Nature and the animals and plants that share our planet. This is what we work for at the institute, and we believe in this. We believe in sustainability of both human and natural communities. We humans cannot live without nature. Nature can live without us, but we cannot live without nature. And we better get our act together or we will go extinct as a species. The greedy people, of course, would love for us to be fighting each other, Jews versus Christians, Shia versus Sunni, etc. And that's what imperialism and colonialism tries to do. It tries to promote this division that's unnatural, in my humble opinion, and it's something we ought to fight, and it's something we ought to work together. People like Nancy and people here. I mean, I have an Israeli woman living here at the institute for the past year almost, continuously working with us, volunteering with us. So we welcome, by the way, volunteers from around the world. If people in Virginia would like to come spend time with us, we provide room and board, and the website is shown there, palestinenature.org. So we'd love to see you.
Absolutely, and really, thank you for sharing. That message about diversity, and diversity being a strength because and really recognizing the interdependence of nature and our ecosystem, and the fact that as humans we can really learn from that. Right, nature is independent and is sustainable on its own without the impacts of humans. Right, like you said, nature won't go extinct, and we should look to that and really understand that we also have interdependence to with other people, with other religions, with other nations, neighbors, right? Really understand that, and to really save our race, the human race from going extinct, we have to do that. We have to be interdependent the way nature is interdependent amongst the different ecosystems and different species, right? And really, thank you for pointing that out because even at Virginia Interfaith Power and Light, we really strive to promote that message of interdependence and recognizing that not only are we dependent on nature, but we are also dependent on other folks, other religions, other leaders, to really champion environmental justice so that we can really make a change together. This is not on the individual, but on the community, on the beloved community, that we have to fix this issue together. Because, it's really, speaking of extinction, I don't want to get too sad on this show, but, we are at, I believe, zero point 0.3 degrees Celsius from reaching that 1.5 unlivable situation. So we have to really act now. And it is imperialistic, like, to other folks, right? To other communities, and not work with them because of that othering, because they're different than us, because they have different religious or worldview, right? So thank you for that message. And to really understand the work that you do at the museum and at the institute. What We have heard that you use green building plans throughout your institute and museum, and that's a big effort and a big achievement in Palestine. So could you describe some of the measures you have used to make these facilities more sustainable, and maybe the folks that are listening could adapt some of your and how they could adapt some of your practices?
Um, Thank you. Yes, indeed, we do a lot of activities and a lot of functions. Primarily, we focus on children. We have a community garden. We have an exploration garden for children. We want to reconnect children to the land and to be able to raise their food that they need. This is food sovereignty. It's important. We even in the refugee camp, we teach them how to grow vegetables on the roofs, on the ceilings, on the sides of the walls, even with plastic bottles, recycled plastic bottles. People can see a lot of examples on our website of these activities, but primarily it's empowerment activities that shows people sometimes the occupation is mostly mental. If we liberate our minds, we can think of ways to do things, even with the limited water and limited land, because Israel took our water, took our land. There are some things that can be done. For example, with aquaponics and aquaculture and hydroponics and things like that. We grow fish, for example, and vegetables in small areas recycling water. Of course, recycling, including recycling human waste, even, and things like that. There are, recycling plastics and trash and organics in the trash via composting, for example. I encourage everybody in the US or wherever they are, by the way, not to throw any organic waste, in the solid waste bin or something. Make a hole and compost it, and it's the most effective, fertilizer for your land, increasing organic substances, harvesting rainwater, which we do now. Because as I said, it's last week we got a lot of rain, but most of the year is going to be very dry. So you might as well harvest and save rainwater because you're going to need it, and otherwise you will be thirsty. So these are many hundreds of ways that people could empower themselves, even in difficult circumstances, even in climate change situations. If we put our mind to it, and especially the young people have innovative ideas always to really save resources and use them more effectively.
That sounds great. Thank you so much for sharing. And we always welcome questions from the audience with this show. And excitingly, we have one for Dr. Qumsiyeh, and I'm going to put on the screen and read it. Jim Metz asks that the UN reports that 90% of the Gaza aquifer is undrinkable. 80 to 90 million liters of untreated sewage is dumped into the sea each day. What can the international community do to address this poisoning of the Palestinians in Gaza?
Yeah, Gaza is 2.5, 2.2 million people. who are squeezed into a very small enclave. Most of them are refugees from 1948, and they are being besieged and literally being starved to death. And the situation is horrible. I mean, it can fit the definition, international definition of genocide.
Mm.
There's an international convention against genocide. But in terms of the environmental issues in Gaza, like you point out, the water is a most urgent situation. Part of the reason is that Israel prevents the water from flowing into Gaza through Wadi Gaza, which is the main source. So the aquifer is being depleted. The population is expanding in size. And indeed, also sewage is a big problem. Israel does not allow some equipment into Gaza, including repair for sewage treatment facilities or electricity plants. And of course, you cannot have sewage treatment without electricity because you need the motors. So you cannot really operate them. So they dump their sewage into the Mediterranean, unfortunately. And this is very interesting that the sewage that's dumped into the Mediterranean with the currents actually flows up to Jaffa and Tel
Mhm.
Aviv. So literally, the Israelis are swimming in the shit of Gaza because their government takes wrong political decisions that are based on just their interest in destroying Gaza as a potential resistance rather than think long-term sustainability issues. I mean, the other thing is impoverishment of a population, which I tell my Israeli friends, when you impoverish a population, actually their reproduction rate increases. When they are wealthy, when they are comfortable, they don't have as many children. So if you are worried about this demographic bomb that you always tell us about, then you need to improve the life of the local people, not impoverish them and discriminate against them in such a way.
Mm.
Absolutely. And thank you so much
And
for
oh, yeah, you mentioned what's an international community. International community is responsible because there's international law, there's humanitarian law, and also some in the international community, including the US, and I'm a US citizen, so my tax money is used to oppress the Palestinians, okay? And so the US is responsible because it gives Israel more money than it gives Sub Saharan Africa and Latin America combined. And it shields Israel from international law by using the veto power at the UN. So it is a responsibility of the US government. It's a responsibility of us as American citizens. As I said, I'm one of you. Also, it's a responsibility of us to act.
absolutely. And thank you so much. Um, and it doesn't seem like we have any more questions from the audience. And I think we can definitely end on that powerful note of encouraging not just individuals but nations to act. Right. This is an international justice problem, and it's important that we are there to help folks who are in need of access to proper water and sanitation, especially when you're thinking of the fact that we're in a global pandemic of COVID-19 with different variants, right? Water is essential to life. And we wholeheartedly believe that here in Virginia, Power and Light. So thank you so much for getting on this show and sharing your stories and your efforts to really amplify the climate justice issues in Palestine, both from Palestine, Dr. Qumsiyeh, and here in Richmond, Nancy. And thank you so much for being here and making the time today. And as always, you can come back to this show if you haven't watched it and didn't finish watching it all the way, and please come back and check out this show in the future time and share with your friends and family, because this is an important topic. As always, join our mailing list to get all the updates, not just about what's happening in Palestine, but here in Virginia and throughout the Commonwealth. As you see on the screen, we have a Bitly link for you all to join us and really know what's happening throughout GA, but also throughout the year in regards to environmental justice in Virginia, and hopefully globally by inviting awesome guests like Dr. Qumsiyeh and Nancy here. So see you on the next episode, as always, on next Friday at 12 p.m. And thank you so much for Dr. Qumsiyeh and Nancy for being here.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Thank you.